Recording.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Justin again from the Kansas Socialist Book Club.
Hey, we'll fly
Oh,
out of the new
I'm
KCI
sorry.
later this week.
That was on my fault because these news articles have advertisements that make noise.
Yep.
Anyways, so yeah, we're doing something a little different. We just finished up Reform or Revolution, and so this week, in between books, we thought it would be a good idea to have a discussion about current events in Kansas, because as you will see, there are a lot of very disturbing laws and bills being approved in the state. We're going to talk about some of those, and we're going to discuss some questions, right? The questions we want to hit on are like, why are we seeing all of this? We call it reactionary, so like socially backwards, regressive, and chauvinistic attitudes like transphobia, queerphobia, misogyny, sexism, racism. Like, why do we see all these things make a comeback in 2023 after supposedly, decades of progress? That's debatable, but why is there this sudden backlash? We want to identify particular trends that we see, right? And we also want to talk about, like, is this really popular? Like, do the people of Kansas really want this? Or is it like a small group that wants this? What's going on with that? And we want to talk about things also like how the mainstream media, how do politicians say we should deal with this? We want to talk about how that's been working and if there's any other ideas. And what else we can do to combat this reactionary tide. And then finally, or I'm sorry, do you want to say something? Okay. And finally, we want to know and understand, because we're a study group, right? So you want to understand, like, what's the material basis for all this? In other words, like, who's profiting off of this? Why is this making a comeback, and who is benefiting from it? So I got some articles here. I'll summarize this one because I have children in school. So, and then I'll let other people can summarize the other articles. So this one says, Kansas State Representative calls rainbow drawings proof of indoctrination at a Leavenworth, Kansas school, right? And so basically the kids were trying to, they had an assignment where they said, okay, draw something that makes every student in our school can be whatever. It's trying to be like a welcoming message and tell everyone that, like, oh, no matter what your background or whatever, like, you're welcome at our school. I think every sane parent can agree that that's probably a good thing. And one of the children drew this, as you can see here, this trans LGBT flag, and it says, gay, lesbian, pan, and trans, everyone is welcome here, by a little girl in the 4th grade. And a state legislator saw this and made a huge deal and was like, oh, see, they're indoctrinating our children into becoming gay and lesbian and transgender, blah, blah, blah. And, the usual nonsense. And the parent was very upset about this because it identified their kid. They didn't get any permission from the parent to display this. And that's basically what the article was about. I just want to say I have a daughter, and she is 8 years old. And she one day came up to me as an 8-year-old girl and said, Dad, I'm a lesbian. And I was like, okay, And the reason I'm bringing that up is because if an 8-year-old can, like, know their sexuality and what they're attracted to, like, it's not indoctrination. Children, like, when they're really young, they know, right? That, like, whether they have, what their gender identity is, they know, who they're attracted to and all that. It's not brainwashing a child to say, hey, like, this is, they already know. Does that make sense? Like, you're not telling these kids something that they don't already know about themselves. And it's really kind of insulting to children, and it doesn't really view them as like actual people. It views them more as property to think like, oh, you don't know for yourself. Like, you don't know yourself very well. Oh, hello, welcome.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Now that's this one. We'll go on to the next article. Does anyone want to summarize this article about the Republicans blocking the state colleges from using DEI statements?
I mean, I can give it a shot. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a really short article. They were
Mhm.
just trying to limit that what they see as fair access to colleges. They want to, the quote unquote merit. They want to at state senate level at each college. There's some level of diversity, equity, and inclusion that they take in place when hiring, as well as like school application wise. It's just a way for schools to really make their either school or workplace to make their place more diverse and more including to everyone. Because say your white applicant has a different background, different schooling background, they could go to private school, while um, or other communities won't have the same access to these prior schooling that the white students usually have. um,
Mhm.
but they claimed it as like perpetuating victimhood. They thought this would promote like fairness and job applications and whatnot, which is just another idea of ridiculousness that white Republicans in the Senate see.
Yeah. Another word, so yeah, DEI, like Nick said, means diversity, equity, inclusion, in case you didn't know. And another word you might have heard that's in this realm is affirmative action. I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but it's a related concept. So I just wanted to mention that, but I think that's a good explanation. Thank you, Nick. This is the third article. It says, as Kansas lawmakers target abortion rights, opposition unites at the state house, right? So does anyone want to summarize this one? Okay, I can go ahead and summarize it then. So basically, there was these sisters from Lawrence. They organized a coalition of men and women from around the state who gathered at the Capitol, and they basically were protesting against the anti-transgender, which we'll talk about that one next, as well as the anti-abortion bill, right? And they were saying, like, hey, the people already spoke out about this, and it's ridiculous. We have to be here. Let's see, that was Senate Bill 286. That was the one that said it would make it illegal to manufacture a medication used in abortions called, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, mifepristone. I'm not a pharmacist, so I might have butchered the pronunciation there. It's this word right here. Um, yeah, it bans all abortions except, in the instance of the life of a mother, it's always the exception. Um, and then this other one would have said, yeah, there was the two bills, and then the House Bill 2429 said that they want to give state funding to services that promote adoption or so-called alternatives to abortion for women, or I should say people with uteruses who face unplanned pregnancies, right? Um, and they wanted to spend it says 1.7 million there. Um, and then there was a bunch of loopholes. They wanted to ban telemedicine prescriptions of the mifepristone. Um, and then let's see what else. Yeah, so it was just basically detailing all the different bills that are basically having to do with abortion in the Senate and House in the state of Kansas. Um, that was pretty much this one. Oh yeah, and they also wanted to propose a law that would, like in Texas, that would allow anyone. It doesn't matter who it is. I could be someone I never even met. I could sue them for they have an abortion. You can sue a woman who has an abortion, and anyone who helps them too. So by help, that could mean you just drove them to the clinic. That could mean you are the doctor who provided the service. That could mean any number of things. It's really a disturbing development. And then finally, this last one, it says the Kansas Senate approves a transgender sports ban, and the bill was supported by a veto-proof majority, right? Anyone want to try and summarize this one? Oh, this one's pretty short.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it sounds about, they call it the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. It was a veto-proof majority. So
It's kind of ironic though, because there was only 3 trans athletes in Kansas at this time. I think they're probably gonna be out of sports now, but they were all in swimming, and they were none of them actually won any like competitions or anything. They were like JV level athletes, you know. Not the bash on these athletes.
right.
The fairness here is just kind of ironic because they're not winning. They're they're just trying to be a normal student in school.
Yeah. I also feel like they didn't consult any of the student athletes. Like, this is all adults making these laws, right? Like, was there any input from the people who were competing against the students? Because I know a lot of student athletes are like, we don't care. Like, we're fine with competing against any woman, whether they're cisgender or transgender. Like, we just, if we don't care. So kind of like they're creating an issue where no issue exists, right? And we'll get into that. Does anyone have any comments or questions about any of these articles before we dive into the discussion points here? Which I'm going to put those on a word pad.
And I mean, like, this is just a select few of the articles that are happening in Kansas. Just there's several more that we could have picked as well that are
Yes.
that are trying to override the abortion vote no act that we had and stuff like that.
Yes, I agree with that. Okay, so can we see let me see the video here for the word thing. Actually, I'm gonna change window here to the Word document. Can everyone see the Word document that I got open?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. And then the font's readable and everything?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, we decided as the leadership, we kind of wanted to focus on I don't know what you'd say, like different demographics, different marginalized people to kind of make the group more welcoming. And we thought, within the news, they're talking about women's health issues and transgender rights issues, that this would be a good place to start, right? That's why we chose this one. But yeah, as Nick said, there is a myriad of horrible things going on in the state of Kansas that our reactionary legislators are got on the agenda. Yeah. So number one, right? So why, after decades of, I said, seeming social progress, because it's not all been perfect, but why I said social progress is because, like, I remember, I think it was 2011. I believe the court case was called Obergefell. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. So that one legalized gay marriage. I'm not trying to say like transgender people have had it like good or anything, but like there's been some media representation, and it seems to me, at least, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but like it seems like around the time that Trump got elected, like 2016, is when a lot of like the really, really vicious, like explicitly transphobic shit started popping up in like popular discourse. I might be wrong, and feel free to correct me if I am, but that's how I saw it anyways. I mean, it's always been there to some degree, but I feel like since then it's gotten that much more vicious, to the point where now it's like murders are on the rise, and you can look at the statistics that backs this up, I believe. You have the assault on, as well as on women's rights, like the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade last year. That's huge. So why do people think that all of this backlash against social progress is happening today?
I think partially one of the reasons is I think what could you answer it first, or I think, because I could give an answer, but I think that you might be able to elaborate better.
Yeah, I can. Oops. I want to give other people a chance first, so does anyone else want to maybe take a shot at it?
I mean, it's kind of like, political opportunism. Cultural issues are easy to mobilize bases. It's something that's not really affecting the day-to-day lives of people, but it's easy to bring this up and, attack certain groups.
Scapegoating. Yes, that's fair.
It-
Oh, go ahead,
I
Sam.
view this backlash as it is the reactionary sector, like the most reactionary sector of capital. They see that their control is slipping. That the colonial state is based on it's based on having privileges for only cisgender white hetero men. And so with this progress that we've been slowly seeing, it's been in good times mostly. I mean, a lot of it has been since 2008, since the recovery from the recession. And now we're seeing a new economic crisis. And so they want to clamp that back down again to where it was in the 90s or the 80s or the 50s, whatever, because that's the only way they know how to keep control over society and keep their money flowing.
That's a very good point. Yeah, it's tied into the business cycle and the economic, status of an economic crisis. Yes.
So I
Absolutely.
feel like if the economics right again or whatever for the upper class, they raise the rate of profit again, which won't happen because profit has a tendency to fall. But if that were to happen, we would see a lot of the people that are pushing this drop it.
Yeah, that's true because it's and this is a historical trend that doesn't just happen in the United States either, right? Look at what happened in Weimar Germany. Weimar Germany was the predecessor to Nazi Germany after World War One. They turned into a quote unquote democratic republic, like a democratic bourgeois republic, to be clear. And actually, Weimar Germany was very relatively for the time progressive. They had an entire institute. I think it was called like the Hirschfeld Institute of Sexology, where that was like the leading world institute to study LGBT issues and sexuality and stuff, right? And they actually they treated transgender people, gave them hormones and mental health counseling, and it was very progressive for the time in that respect. But then, as you know, the reparations for the Treaty of Versailles and the hyperinflation in Germany, like Sam was saying, the economy, people would have wheelbarrows full of cash, and they would go and dump them, and it was so worthless, they used it instead of firewood, right? Like, that's how bad the economy was in Germany. So it was much worse than it is here, but I think that proves Sam's thing, because then what happened? Along comes this charismatic Nazi called Hitler, and he says, German people, look, I see your problems. I see the unemployment and the inflation, and let me tell you, there's a couple of groups that are causing these issues, right? And it gives people the scapegoat, right? So I think, Sam, that was a really good point. It's tied into the economics of it, right? Petamilo, did you want to say anything now that you heard a few people talk about it?
I don't. I think I agree. I agree with what's been said.
Okay.
Definitely.
So it kind of covered what already was been said. Okay.
I got something.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that the popularity and spread of the internet also has probably contributed to like an echo chamber for reactionary views. I also think that's led to a lot of the progress in terms of like social progress with trans people and LGBT. We've been able to, group together and form coalitions better. So like, there's a lot of good and bad, but I think that echo chamber is really, it's blowing up. They have their own like social media apps now, so it's just gotten worse.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's like a material thing, right? The internet's a material thing. It's a computer network. Right. Yeah. And yeah, that works both ways. Yeah. Yeah, especially like because you have echo chambers like 4chan for the reactionaries, where they can just, some people just go on there out of curiosity, and what starts out is them saying, oh, I can say racial slurs here, and then 2 weeks later they're full blown Nazis, and then also you have other places for like transgender people, lesbians and gay people, and other groups can kind of find their own people. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else? Okay, I think we can move on to the next question because that's all the stuff I was going to say. So, yeah, number 2. So in the articles, we identified specifically misogyny, the hatred of women, and I'm going to say queer phobia to be like the all-encompassing term for LGBT bigotry. Are there any other socially backwards and reactionary trends that you notice, and what might those be?
Well, I mean, we've seen, especially since the election of Trump, the huge, massive rise in outright white nationalism, blatant, open, explicitly calling for a white ethno state, which certainly to some degree existed before that. And you see that especially since 1996 with Waco, Ruby Ridge, and the Oklahoma City bombing. But the most of the people were still, hiding. They're in Idaho in their little camps or whatever. And now they're out in the open and they're marching. And even just yesterday, there was a pro-trans rally in Ohio, and the counter-protesters were flying swastikas and SS runes. And that's an insane, it's just been 7 years since we've seen this shift. It's insanely quick, and that isn't quite obviously a backwards view.
Yeah, that absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely making a comeback. Yeah, explicit white supremacism. That is, yeah. That's a very good example, Sam. Anyone else? I'll chip one in. Let me undo that. Russophobia. By Russophobia, I mean racism against Russian or people who are perceived to be Russian, right? And then that comes again in the rise of 2016. It kind of is where you can tie the explicit white supremacism to the the quote unquote conservative faction with Trump. I think Russophobia can be tied to the liberal wing. So like, in 2016 you had Hillary Clinton and all, oh, well, Russia meddled in our elections. And now look at some of the propaganda. I've seen ones that say like, oh, Russian people as a whole are genetically predisposed to aggression and they're, genetically untrustworthy. It's like, it sounds like race science out of a Nazi textbook. And that's coming from the liberals, right? Like, and yeah, like, and again, I'm not trying to say like Vladimir Putin is a great guy or anything. I'm just purely talking about how like the narrative of this narrative has become racialized, and it's a repeating trend because they saw the same thing during the Cold War, right? So that's one I wanted to highlight. Any others?
So I want to tack on to the
go ahead.
real quick. It is intimately linked to the open white supremacy because it is reusing the imagery, the Nazi imagery of the Asiatic hordes, the Mongol hordes, to typify the Russians as evil Asians. So it is white supremacy in a little less obvious form.
Yes, that's a very good point because, like even if you look at like what the actual German Nazis said, they viewed the Slavic people, to which the Russians are, considered a category of, as genetically inferior, less like they considered Jewish people to be genetically inferior. So even though we've historically perceived them as white in this country, that's the thing about whiteness. You're white until you're not, until your group's not convenient anymore. And similarly, some groups like the Irish, the Polish, for example, in the beginning of this country's history, they weren't considered white. They were considered, a subhuman race just like everyone else. until it became convenient or necessary to incorporate them into whiteness. But just as you can be arbitrarily brought into whiteness, you can also be arbitrarily expelled from whiteness just whenever it's politically convenient, right? That's a very good point. Another one I wanted to bring up was xenophobia. Xenophobia means anti-Chinese president or anti-Chinese prejudice, right? And so again, kind of how Russophobia links to the liberal wing, xenophobia links to, I guess, also the conservative wing, because look at what Tucker Carlson, for example, he's like, well, Russia's not that bad. The ones we need to go to war with are actually China. And we see there's straight up terrorist violent attacks against, they might not even be Chinese. They just, you know, quote unquote, look Chinese, and they're anti-Asian violence, right? That's another thing that's happening, and it's again because China is a geopolitical enemy of the West, even though China's never really, I mean, yeah, maybe they've quote allegedly stolen some stuff from business, but like, has the Chinese government ever harmed me directly, harmed your family directly? I don't think so. So you got to give the American people get some way to hate China and to drum up war support. So what's the best way to do that? Well, racism, right? Any other comments on that, or any other categories or trends? Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one. Okay, so number 3. The people of Kansas, by and large, don't really agree with all of this stuff. With for example, with the women's issue, it was with the abortion issue like last summer. I think that amendment was defeated by a 10% margin, right? That's huge. So I think it was like 60 to 40. 60% of the people in Kansas said, no, we are fine with abortion being legal in our Constitution. So, but our quote unquote representatives keep pushing for it. So I want to ask, like, why? If the people themselves don't want it, why do their so-called representatives seem to keep pushing for it?
Because the politicians are reactionary. They're socially reactionary in their viewpoints.
Okay, that's true. But okay, so even if the individual politician is socially reactionary, like, does that mean the whole voter base isn't necessarily like that?
No, but I mean, no.
Okay. So the point go ahead.
So I was just going to say, yeah, they are politically, or they are socially reactionary, but why are they socially reactionary?
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously not because they're trying to represent the majority of the state, because the majority of the state wants to keep abortion legal, wants to let transgender people live their lives. We've seen this in polls and votes. So why are they reactionary? What end does it serve? They're not reactionary just for the fun of it. It serves a political end, right?
Yes. So I guess as a corollary, Sam, you're absolutely right. The politicians don't represent the masses, so who or what do they represent if it's not the voters? I would say it represents, there's actually a study that like statistically proved in the United States, the average political preference of a voter does not in any way influence how their representatives vote. And what they actually demonstrated was it's the people who donate them money that is the strongest indicator to influence how they vote, right? So what I would say is that the politicians don't represent the people. They represent the people who give them money. or the businesses who give them money, right?
Yeah. Is it okay if I go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is all, tied together. It's the Alec, it's the Christopher Rufos. I don't know if any of you have seen the 2,600 emails that a trans activist leaked
I
about the
heard about
coordination of
those.
all the anti-trans legislation. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's phenomenal work, and there's some good threads summarizing it, so you don't have to go through it all. But I mean, the bottom line is like it goes back to the whole othering thing, and it's a distraction from like meat and potatoes economic policy, right? They never talk about the right never talks about economic policy. Um, they never talk about tax rates on the ultra wealthy. But this is a reaction. It's to burn the fuel up um, of to distract and to burn the political energies up. Because I mean, I'm just thinking about myself and how much energy I've spent in the last year working to help defend trans people and abortion rights, and it's exhausting.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's kind of where I'm at.
No, thank you for sharing that, and I've heard of that. I have to look at those emails. That's interesting, but yeah, I think
Posted the sorry, I posted the thread and the chat here in the room chat.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll check that out after this. But yeah, I think that's a perfect way of stating that. Walk-in is politicians, they want to distract voters because, like you said, if I'm an average working class person is like, hey, how am I gonna pay my rent next month? Then if you distract them and say that transgender people are trying to, attack their children or whatever lies and slanders, then they forget about the rent. They forget about being angry at their landlord, and the capitalists win. Does anyone else have anything to say about this question? Okay, cool. I'm gonna move on then. So number 4, right? How is voting for Democrats or just voting more generally? How has that worked out? Right? Has it done a whole lot to stem the tide of reaction?
No, no.
Why? Well, could you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I mean, partially what the Democrats do is they say that they care about, like, or they try and like pander to non-white people, and then when it is that they're elected, they do everything like they do like the opposite of what they say that they were gonna do, and they use like intersectional politics in like their rhetoric, but they essentially I've heard it said like the Democrats stop criticism of Republicans from like the left.
Mm-hmm.
So they and then they try and filter people like quote unquote progressives into their party, and what and then they end up like diluting them
Mm-hmm.
and making them like not effective or strong at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point about how in their rhetoric they use all this progressive language. They talk about intersectionality and all that, but it never materializes into anything. It reminds me of during George Floyd protests when after George Floyd was executed by Derek Chauvin and the other Minneapolis police, and then the Democrats all came out and they were wearing kente cloths. That's like I don't know how to describe the pattern, but you would know the pattern if you've seen it. But they were all wearing kente cloths and taking a knee, and they said, "Oh, we see you, we hear you, we feel your pain, and we're still going to give the police more money, right?"
Yeah, that's a perfect example of that.
So I would say that's performative. Go ahead. Who was on to say something?
The Roe versus Wade was overturned. That's the biggest blow to abortion rights in 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a 50-50 Senate with a Democratic tiebreaker, and they couldn't do anything. Or, no, they didn't do anything. They could have done, like, there was a lot of stuff they could have done, but they refused to wield their power because it is more useful to them to be weak, because if you're weak, you can fundraise better.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they can make themselves look like the victim. Like that, it's that they want to maintain like a victimhood mentality. So in the next election, they can go like, we need money to stop the Republicans who are super racist and reactionary. But then they proceed to do nothing. So they're like worse in a lot of ways.
So
They're a lot worse in a lot of ways because a lot of people think that they're better. That's why they're in a lot of ways they're worse.
Yeah. Hey, can Sam finish his thought though?
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to say was the other day when Mitch McConnell fell at whatever, the hotel or whatever, and was in the hospital. You saw a lot of people on Twitter, like self-avowed, progressive, liberal Democrats, whatever. They were saying, oh, I hope that Mitch McConnell gets better, and even though he has different politics, yada, 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 and then you search through their profile, and they're calling the Republicans fascist. And so
Yeah.
you can't, I mean, I guess literally you can, and they do, but you can't really have both ways. Either you think they're fascists, or you think that you shouldn't wish, or you think that they just have a political difference. Because they use this, like you said, they use the rhetoric and they redirect it into being to placating anti-fascist sentiment, really.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Wow. Okay, I didn't think of that one. That's a good one, Sam. Yeah, I remember after Roe was overturned, like maybe an hour after the announcement, Nancy Pelosi herself penned an email and mailed it out. And I got the email because I did campaign for Bernie in 2020, right? Like, oh, we need your help. The abortion is under attack, and send us $20. You know,
You're in power now.
Yeah, and that's the thing is kind of what Sam said about the civility. There's also the arbitrary rules, right? I remember people were like, Biden, why don't you pack the court? Why don't you just nominate more judges and overturn this? And he says, well, that would go against the decorum and the centuries tradition. And so not that, bourgeois legalism means anything, but there's nothing in the Constitution of the United States that says you have to have exactly 9 Supreme Court justices. In fact, Franklin Roosevelt, not that I'm a fan of FDR, but to his credit, he did pack the court when Republicans tried to interfere with it and nominate conservative justices. He's like, I'm just going to nominate like 10 more of justices who agree with me, and we're going to pass the New Deal, right? So it's not that it's even without precedent, but it's just these arbitrary rules. We're helpless to the rules. We just have to do this because that's what the rules say, even though they're the ones who create the rules, right?
The parliamentarian.
Yeah, the parliamentarian. That's a good example. Or nuking the filibuster. They could nuke the filibuster. But here's the thing. They always say, well, if we do that, we might set a precedent for the Republicans. And again, I'm not trying to say the GOP is good, but like, they definitely understand how power works, and they're good. They've proven that they're just going to override whatever norms that they can get away with overriding, right? So it's like, yeah, I've rambled on enough about that. Anyone else want anything to say about this?
Democrats also understand. It's just their whole. I mean, they're just like the we're the victim party. We're with the. Okay, so a large part of their voter base is non-white people. So they try and, like, use rhetoric like, oh, we're with you, we're like, the Democrats, the Republicans, they're gonna come after us, just like they're gonna come after you. Vote for us because we are because we're gonna protect you, the minorities. And what ends up happening is that they literally, like, when it is that those minorities vote for the Democrats, the Democrats will literally just destroy, just economically just destroy them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And not just economically, but again, like you said, they vote to fund more police, racist police, who, by the way, go out and execute the non-white people in the voter base. Like, yeah. Or like Sam said, oh, we'll protect you from the evil, fascist, racist GOP, and then one of the evil, fascist racists has a slip and fall accident, and, oh, well, he's our colleague, and we wish him the best. Even though they were just describing him as a Nazi like 5 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alright, so this leads to question number 5. Right? So now the mainstream political establishment, well, go vote for the Democrats. They're your only hope. Or maybe they even toss us a bone and be like, yeah, we know they're not perfect and they're not great, but right now, right now we need to vote for them. Like, we can sort this all out after the next election, right? And we just said why that doesn't work, right? So what can we do about it if it's not voting for Democrats?
I mean, like, something like this is always good. Education and helping people, bring awareness to issues like this is like the core of it all, the crux of it all. This is how you get grassroots organizing and activism going. This is how you get more base around these type of issues, is through educational purposes. And then, like I said, grassroots organizing, the Democrats really weren't the ones that were pushing for the Vote No campaign. I mean, while they're sure there were, and they were asking for fundraising and stuff, what really was helped with the Vote No campaign was the Kansas abortion office and places like that are, NGOs or non-for-profits just going around door to door, doing their advocacy work and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was true. I remember it wasn't the Democratic Party, it was the League of Women Voters who was organizing random people to come up, which I went and joined them, and we literally spent hours handwriting letters to individual people like, hey, this is a vote is coming up on this amendment, and here's why you should vote no on this amendment to repeal the right to abortion. That wasn't the Democrats. That was, yeah, like you said, Nick, a grassroots organization. Let's see. What else? Yeah, political education. That's a fantastic point, because you have to have right ideas.
Class consciousness.
Uh-huh. Yes. So people have to realize that they are exploited.
Yeah, and then trans people, there's working class trans people, and there's this type of people, and also I think just education about those groups, about LGBTQ, the history of those people, education about those people, I mean, I think would definitely help because it's kind of, you know, like it, because I was talking about the school system, you know, last time. It's kind of like, you know, how we're taught in the school system contributes to like the rising reactionary phenomenons because we're not taught, and we're not really taught class consciousness in the school system, so it just ends up or like we're it's not it, we're not taught about this well. We don't learn things well.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's especially true for children. Because yeah, like if you didn't even know that, like thinking of an example, like you know, the goal of a lot of these reactionaries is they want to remove. Well, I believe they want to eliminate, like as in kill all transgender people. But their stated goal right now is they straight up said we want to remove them from public life. And so if you don't even know what a transgender person is, how are you going to have any solidarity with someone if you don't even know that they exist, right? So that's a really good point, is like educating about, I'd say marginalized identities is like the catch-all phrase, like the histories of the groups, and the histories of their struggles. Because yeah, that's a fantastic point. Anyone else?
Just to piggyback off that, like, what if in schools, like in high school, you were taught about the Stonewall riots? You know, like, just think the difference there is just like we don't know a lot about the history, or well, if you go through the modern educational system, you know, you don't get a full grasp of the the struggles that LGBT communities go through or have gone through. You know, you just think, oh, this is a modern issue but it's realistically, this is decades of work.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Another one example I feel is like the way they teach about like Martin Luther King. You know, like the standard narrative you get in a school is like, well, there was racism and Jim Crow once upon a time, and then Martin Luther King came along, and unfortunately he was assassinated, but everyone came together and held hands, and racism ends, and now we're a perfectly multi-ethnic, colorblind society, the end, right? When that's very, very far from the truth. Anyone else?
So we've been talking about education. That's good. Education's awesome. But I think it was Fred Hampton that said, theory is cool, but theory without practice ain't shit. Right? I think that was Fred Hampton.
Yeah, it was.
So we need to be able, and education is a big part of it, but we do need to figure out a way to translate this into more concrete action.
Yeah, I mean, the go off that, I mean, like, we could, like I was saying, grassroots organizing, we could be handing out, abortion, Plan B, day after pills, or, you could have a group that handed out gender affirming, hormone that you could pick up at CVS or stuff like that. Education's good, like you're saying, but until you start doing the actual practice, the actual, work of it all, the organizing, it's just a hobby.
Yeah, and the practice and the implementation is itself a form of education. That's what Mao said, right? I forget the exact quote, but it was something to the extent of like, students protesting at a university, that's the best education they could possibly get, right? So yeah. And that is something we are trying to transition into, which, by the way, if you're in Manhattan, and Nick and I are trying to get this tenants union organized with some other people locally. So if you're around Manhattan, like, talk to one of us and you can get involved. That's how we're trying to implement it. But yeah, that's a very good point. Without practice, theory is just a hobby. That's true. Anyone else?
I want to tack on to what you said about Mao, about it's not because that college protest quote is good, but also where do correct ideas come from?
Mm-hmm.
They come from social practice. So education without social practice will also inherently be limited.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they
So-
are. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I didn't have anything else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like they're in a dialectical relationship. Like, if you just go out and do stuff with no theory behind it, then it's like, you're just doing stuff to do stuff, and that's a waste of time and resources. So you have to like have the theory to give you the idea, and then you implement the idea through practice, and then after you implement the idea, you say, okay, we tried this thing out, what went right and what went wrong, and what can we improve on next time? That's the correct way. Okay. I know this said this would go on about an hour. I want to move on to the last question, and then we'll wrap it up, right? So what is the material basis for the reactionary social beliefs? Another way of saying this is, who profits off of reaction, and how do they profit from it? I think we kind of hit on some of these points, but let's recap.
The media itself, Murdoch Press,
Mm-hmm.
they profit by drumming up this moral panic, being the only ones to really push this panic, and so they get more clicks, they get more views, they get more ad revenue.
Yes. That's a very good one.
I think that another one is like the co-opting of solidarity amongst like movements, or just when people within the like electoral politics try and like fake solidarity with people, like with trans people, LGBTQ people, so that they can just like opportunistically use it as a way to get themselves elected, or to just make people buy like products with like symbols on it without actually doing anything meaningful.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, co-opting the solidarity. Oh, buy our Black Lives Matter branded T-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I mean, you can even see the opposite. I forget who it was, but after the whole M&M's thing going on, some guy started his own chocolate brand. The anti-woke chocolate brand company. You can see the opposite. Reactionaries do the same thing, or the My Pillow guy. Oh, get my non LGBT pillows here. It's just funny.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, when people fake solidarity for these groups, it just creates like grounds for like a culture war. Like, oh look, the big corporation put a rainbow flag on their Twitter profile. So I think that like people see that and they know that they don't give a shit, but like the people that see that and know that they don't give a shit a lot of the times are reactionaries themselves. So they'll like, they'll do what you said, and they'll open like an anti-LGBT whatever like version of that thing, just to say, oh yeah, get this, because we're not trying to just put on a fake progressive like image behind it. But like,
Yes.
that's just the thing, 'cause I think that a lot of people know that it's bullshit, that like when large companies do that, it's bullshit. But a lot of times people that see that are themselves reactionary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to be clear, like, I would much rather, like, we all have to go to work under capitalism, right? So I would much rather work at a place that's not, like, outwardly bigoted, but I also see what you're saying, and I think a classic example of that is like when Lockheed Martin in June puts up, like their logo with the rainbow. Like Lockheed Martin is a great LGBT place to work. Like,
yeah,
all
like
right,
that. That's the type of.
cool. What about the LGBT Afghan and Iraqi people who you're blowing up with your missiles, right?
There was a Twitter post where I think like the U.S. Army posted like bullets, like rainbow bullets.
Yeah, the Marines. Yep.
Yeah, that's the type of like intersectional imperialism is what I've heard.
Yes, because they say there was a comic that had like two. I think they were like.
And you know what? That's the
Afghan
type of
people.
shit. That's the type of shit that makes people hate LGBTQ people who aren't class consciousness, because
Yeah.
when people see that, they associate like, oh, you like those types of people, and you're associating like that imagery. Like it's imagery association. It's propaganda.
Right.
It's like
yeah.
very.
I don't know if that's why people hate it necessarily. Like I get your point. I think you might be going a little far with it in that direction. In the sense that like I don't think someone who is otherwise not homophobic is going to look at like the Lockheed Martin logo with the rainbow flag and I suddenly changed my views.
But like
now
if someone isn't educated on the subject, and then they see like that. And then if they are maybe like more reactionary, but then they see imagery associated with like a blatantly warmongering like group, like that's not helpful at all for the LGBTQ people, because that's only that's associating like war with those people.
Yeah. It is.
And I can't imagine some of these communities, or the LGBT community, is like promoting or wanting to put their their flag on these bullets per se. That this isn't that. It's just appropriation in a sense.
Yes.
I kind of disagree with you. I don't think people see these flags and they're like, oh, I gotta hate the LGBT now because they're associating with the military or whatever.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know if I said it. I don't know if I said it right. It's more like, you associate this thing with that thing by image association. It's like if I put a picture of Adolf Hitler next to like Vladimir Lenin, and then I say, and then it's like I post, and then I say both these people are dictators, and it's just imagery association.
Right. Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think most American people don't like even associate Lockheed with like bloodthirsty corporation. I think that's like kind of relegated to the niche sphere of like communists and socialists and anarchists, right? But yeah, like I think I think you might be taking it a little far. But like you do highlight a legitimate point in that like a lot of these companies are co-opting this image, like Nick said, and that I think the quintessential summary of that is there's a comic that had two I think they were like Afghan people with a drone above them. And it's like the drone had like the rainbow flag. So it's like at least the person who's blowing us up today, at least their army allows people of all sexualities to pilot the drones, right, that are blowing us up.
Yeah.
I would just say that I think maybe I don't know, we could talk about that more offline, but I think I don't know how to say it. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah,
comments?
I do. So, like, the thing that I see coming from it is that what it does is it says that, like, this is the idea of a trans agenda or an LGBTQ agenda, what it does is it gives people the impression that a marginalized community has more power than they actually have.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody used the word appropriation. That's exactly what it is. They appropriate these images. And I even saw a reactionary the other day on Twitter that said, I'm not going to die for your Skittles flag. mean, that's what it does. It gives a little bit of cover to liberals to say this company's not too bad. But what it really does is it implies a power that just doesn't exist for these groups.
Well, that's what I was saying about like people seeing like imagery like LGBTQ on like rainbow bullets. That goes back to what I was saying. Like uneducated people are gonna see that, and it's like you said, I'm not gonna die for your rainbow like Skittles flag or whatever. That's similar to what I was saying.
Okay, yeah, I see that now. I think it was just the way you worded it was a little well, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. But yeah, that's true, and I think that goes into because yeah, like the Nazis did that too with particular with Jewish people. Even though like Jews were incredibly discriminated against, the way that like Watkins said, the way that they were talked about. They made it look like, oh, there's a Jewish agenda, and made it look like they're controlling the world, and all this complete nonsense, right? So yeah, that's actually a really good point. I'm gonna write that one down. So
Rainbow Skittles flag.
yeah. And I want to be clear, like when we're saying all this, like I think it's better. Like I think it's good that companies aren't outwardly like prejudiced, and I can, you know, like I would much prefer to work at a place that wasn't. In fact, I wouldn't work at a place that was just explicitly prejudiced. But that's not what we're criticizing here, right? We're not criticizing like what we're criticizing is like the co-optation. I want to be clear about that, right?
Yeah.
We're not. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that for especially for people who
Yeah.
might be listening on the recording.
And I don't think that like I think that it's different when a company is, you know, you're okay with just people in general, but when it's obvious that you're just pandering like just to like try and open a market, then that's where it's like, okay, like we know that you're not like that you're just you don't I don't know.
Bank of America has the rainbow LGBT flag credit card and supports the Pride Parade. Creating a market, that's an advertising market. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So,
Who was going to speak?
so do you guys think that maybe some of these faux progressive corporations are stoking the flames on the other side because it would drive more money to them? So they are like covertly, secretly funneling money towards these anti-trans groups.
I definitely think that is a possibility. Like the culture war is good for them because I think like they can. It's like kind of like what I've said. Like they can propagate markets by making people like. They can make an environment where there's people who are like, we're on this side of the culture war, so we're gonna go buy that thing over there because they're on that side of the culture war, and then we're on this side of the culture war, so we're gonna buy this product.
I think that's not what Sam was saying.
Yeah.
But I think
I mean,
if you want to finish your thought.
Yeah.
So what I meant was, so I'm trying to think of it. I saw something like this. I don't remember what company it was, but there's some company that does all this faux progressive stuff. They do pride flags and all this stuff to look like they're showing solidarity, but then on the back end, they're funneling money towards these really right-wing groups because that serves an advertising purpose, right? If you have more hate, then you have more people that want to show that they are counter to the hate. And so they're stoking both sides of it. They're playing both sides so that they make more money off of it.
yeah, well, that's what I was saying, or at least like a little bit. I think.
Was it something similar like Ben and Jerry's? I think does something like that. It's
Yeah.
like I think it's Ben
Yeah.
and Jerry's, and they were even caught using like children laborers here in America. Like
Wow.
they're one of the, quote unquote, super progressive companies trying to push for, legalization of marijuana and so on and so forth. But they were, sending aid to the IDF soldiers and using children laborers here in America is just, capitalism 101 right there, I guess.
Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. And, we're running a little bit over time here. I want to end up wrapping it up. Any closing thoughts from anyone or anything?
There needs to be more education on this subject, and in order for people to understand that the rights of the LGBTQ community matters, is I think through class consciousness and to realize that their interests are very similar to just everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like solidarity is the key to everything. If you don't have solidarity with someone, then it's easy to marginalize them, and the education should focus around that. I agree with that. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap this up because we're running like 15 minutes over time. Said it would be about an hour. Next week, we are going to have a special guest. Mr. Pius Rinto, the International Secretary of the Communist Party of Swaziland. He has generally agreed to come speak with us. I don't know what he's going to speak about. I told him the floor is his. Whatever he wants to say to our group, it could be anything. He's more than welcome to talk about whatever he wants. And also, there will be an opportunity to ask him questions as well, about whatever you want. He's a really friendly guy. It's going to be very educational, I think. And I think that's going to go a long way to build that kind of solidarity.
Gonna be
And I'm
good.
excited about it. Yeah, we'll definitely record that one too. Yeah, thank you for everyone for coming along. I think that go ahead and ends the session, although you're welcome to hang out more if you want. I'm going to go eat lunch. And then, Petamilo, we should work sometime later today on practicing the audio-visual stuff for Sunday.
Yeah.
Next Sunday. Just to make sure that it's all set up, because it's going to be a little logistically complicated, but we'll make it work.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's about all. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I am going to go ahead and get some food. Thank you, everyone, for showing up.
Good stream. Good study room.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone. I'll see you guys next week.
Yes.
Good job.
Thank you.